Everybody, welcome to today's show. Welcome to Advocate Information Highway. I'm your host, Anthony Lorito-Duke, and we have a very important topic for today's show, in which it is the cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and SNAP benefits that the government has done, and to continue the talking about the ACA subsidies issues. So let's get right into this. Um, But before that, I want to remind everybody that the Republicans who control all of Congress, the United States House of Representatives, the United States Senate, and of course, in the White House, um, they gave permanent, permanent tax breaks to the filthy rich, the top 1%. And when they did that, there has to be a way to cover those permanent tax breaks financially, money wise. So why? Uh, uh, so the reason why Republicans really did the cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and food stamps is to cover that money part of the permanent tax breaks that they gave to the filthy rich, because there's got to be a way to cover that. So the funding to cover that, that's the real reason why the Republicans did the cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and SNAP benefits. And the SNAP benefits are formerly known as food stamps. So I'm going to read you a few things, ladies and gentlemen. And I want you guys to really listen into this. This was back on June 20th, okay, when the big, beautiful bill that Trump and the Republicans created, that's when the Republicans put the Medicare cuts into play into that bill. I'm going to read you something here. Okay. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, a Republican of South Dakota, for the first time acknowledged that Medicare, which covers about 20% of the United States population, mainly seniors, said, I think anything we can do that's waste, fraud, and abuse are open to discussions. And that's what Thune said when he was asked about whether Medicare cuts are on the table. Okay, like I said, Republicans were talking talking about lies when they're talking about the waste, the fraud, and the abuse, which was completely false. Which was completely false, by the way. It was just to cover their rear ends and to cover the funding for when they gave the permanent tax breaks to the filthy rich, that top 1%. That's the real reason why they did these cuts. Okay. And that was one thing. And that was back in June 20th of this year, 2025. This year. Okay. Now, here's something else. This was June 29th. Senate Republicans restore Medicaid cuts to Trump tax package. Okay. Hmm. Senate Republicans restored major Medicaid cuts to Donald Trump's signature economic legislation, the one big beautiful bill, refashioning a key provision to overcome a procedural obstacle. Spending cuts to health insurance programs for the poor and disabled partially offset revenue losses from tax cuts in the measure and are a crucial demand of Republican fiscal conservatives. Okay? All right? Now, that was June 29th of this year, 2025. This year. And before I even continue, here was an article from June 20th. Senate Republicans were using a slogan to justify their Medicaid cuts. You don't want to know what that slogan was? Listen closely. I'm going to tell you what that slogan was. They said, "We all die." That was their slogan to justify their Medicaid cuts, ladies and gentlemen. That's what the Republicans in the United States Senate were going around saying. Okay? Now, Republicans, here's another thing from July 2nd of this year, July 2nd, 2025. Republicans were coining a new term for Medicaid cuts to mislead voters. I'm going to read you this. Republicans are rolling out a new way to talk about Medicaid cuts, and they're counting on voters not noticing. Instead of calling it what it is, they, the Republicans, are using a softer label titled reducing growth. That's what the Republicans were coining the new term for the Medicaid cuts to mislead voters. All right. And here's another thing. This was also from July 2nd. J.D. Vance, Vice President J.D. Vance, was the deciding vote, ladies and gentlemen, to cut Medicaid across the country. Vice President J.D. Vance was the deciding vote to cut Medicaid across the whole United States. Now, here's another thing from July 2nd. The Senate mega bill, the Republicans, that one big beautiful bill that they helped create, marks the biggest Medicaid cuts in the United States history, ladies and gentlemen. The biggest Medicaid cuts in the United States history. And that came from an article back in July of this year, 2025. That Senate mega bill, the United States Senate, the Republican controlled United States Senate. This was the Republicans doing this. Marks the biggest Medicaid cuts in the United States history. Now, states all across the United States are scrambling for funds because of Trump's cuts to Medicaid and SNAP benefits. SNAP is formerly known as food stamps, mind you. States all across the country are scrambling for funds because of this, because of what the Republicans did. And I want to read you something else. And I want you to really listen to this. Okay? This was from back in July of this year, 2025. Just keep that in mind. In July 2025, Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson voted in favor of a bill with a projected 186 billion. Listen to that word, billion. That's with a B like Bob. In cuts to the SNAP program, which provides federal food benefits to roughly 42 million Americans. Okay? Let that sink in. They did all these cuts already, ladies and gentlemen. Now, like I said, these cuts were really to cover the Republicans' rear ends because of the permanent tax breaks that they gave to the filthy rich. Okay? Now, I want to touch a little bit on the ACA subsidies issues. Okay? When the Democrats created the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, there are flaws inside of that. Okay? Because with human beings, none of us are created perfect. Nobody's created perfect. And with that being said, whenever we create something, it's not going to be perfect. But with that even being said, the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, really helped a tremendous amount of people, a tremendous amount. And when the Republicans spreading a lie that immigrants were being allowed on can get the can be part of the ACA. That is false. There's a federal law that already prohibits immigrants from being allowed to be on the ACA. All right, so that was a BS lie that the Republicans were spreading around. Now, with that being said, again, yes, there are some flaws with the ACA because nobody's perfect. We're human beings. Now, the Republicans and the Democrats need to put their differences aside, act like mature adults, act like professionals, and come to the table to really fix the ACA subsidies issues. Now, Republicans are saying Democrats created this horrible program, the ACA, but the Republicans are forgetting that they screwed up. The Republicans screwed up Medicare, Medicaid, and the SNAP program. Okay? Seriously. So just put your differences aside. Both major political parties need to come together at the table, put their differences aside, act mature and professional, and fix the ACA subsidies issues. Because come January of 2026, everyone is going to feel the pain of the cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and stuff. They're going to feel that pain. And of course, if the ACA subsidies issues doesn't get fixed, people on the ACA are going to feel that as well. Now, getting to the SNAP program, the Secretary of Agriculture, who's part of Trump's administration, is saying that there was a lot of fraud because a lot of people who have died are still collecting SNAP benefits. And she also turned around and said a suggestion that SNAP, the SNAP program should just be shut down completely, and everybody's got to reapply, and and so on and so forth. Let's take that portion that she was suggesting. SNAP program should just be shut down completely and whatever. First of all, she does not have the power and the authority to do that. She does not have that power and authority. She does not. NOT. Congress is are the ones who created the SNAP program. Congress are the ones who fund the SNAP program. So she does not, the Secretary of Agriculture does not have the power nor the authority to shut down the SNAP program. If you want to really cut the error rates of the SNAP program and really fix it, Congress should get on the governors of each state and the mayors of each city and tell them, listen, governors of each state, get on your government state workers, get on your government state agencies, whoop their candy asses, force them to do their jobs accurately. All right. And Congress should also do that to the mayors of each state as well and say, listen, get on your city government workers and force them to do their jobs because it's the government workers that are screwing up people's uh, um, uh, cases. They are the ones screwing things up. Okay, if the governors and the mayors of each city and state get on their state government workers and their city government workers and say, listen, do your jobs or you do not have a job, then you will see the error rates really drastically go down. Okay. And the Secretary of Agriculture and the Trump administration need to get something else into their brains. Okay. And that is people who are alive and who collect SNAP benefits, they have to recertify periodically. And when they recertify, they have to show evidence as well. So to give the stupid, pathetic suggestion of shut down the SNAP program and everybody's got to reapply, that is pathetically stupid. Okay, and like I said, the Secretary of Agriculture does not have the power and the authority to do that, only Congress does. Okay, now let's get to the part about where the Secretary of Agriculture was talking about people who have died but still collecting SNAP benefits. I'm going to explain this as easy as I can. I'm going to give you a perfect example. Okay, let's just say, for example, if a person who lives in one state, like let's say New York, collects government benefits like the SNAP benefits, but then if that person who lives in New York goes to another state, like let's say the state of Florida, and to go visit a friend or family member, right? Let's say they go on vacation to another state and they go to visit a friend or family member. Then once they get to that other state, like let's say the person who collects the government benefits who lives in, let's say, for example, in New York, but goes to Florida for vacation to go visit a friend or family member, and while they're in that other state, like let's say Florida, if they and while they're there, if something happens to them, like let's say they pass away, if they die, the state government agency of Florida are the ones who write out the death certificate. Okay, because it happened in that particular state, and when that state government agency writes out the death certificate, they send that death certificate to the Social Security Administration, the only federal government agency uh, allowed for them to send it to. They don't send it to any other federal government agency or whatever. Now, just follow me with this. that state government agency for whatever state they passed away in, they should send that death certificate to the federal government, okay, and also to the state government agency, the proper state government agency for wherever that person, for whatever state that person actually lives, okay? Because here's the thing, when the Social Security Administration, that federal government agency, when they get a death certificate of a person who is on government benefits like SNAP benefits, that federal government agency, the SSA, is supposed to send that information over to the proper state government agency for wherever that person resides and collects the SNAP benefits. And they're supposed to say, that federal government agency is supposed to say to that state government agency, here's the situation. Here's the copy of the death certificate of the person who lives in your state who collects SNAP benefits. Uh, you got to stop their SNAP benefits. Then that state government agency is supposed to notify the city government agency of the city where that person resided in. That state government agency is supposed to tell that city government agency, listen, this is the situation. Here's the proof of the death certificate of that person. Do not send out SNAP benefits for this person. They died. But that's not what happens. These government agency workers refuse to do their jobs. A lot of these uh, government agency workers, they screw up people's cases like you have no idea. So if you want to lower the error rates, Congress needs to get on the governors of each state and the mayors of each city and say, listen, to the governors of each state, get on your state government agency workers and force them to do their jobs. And the governors need to stipulate to all their state government agency workers, do your jobs or you do not have a job. Congress also needs to do the same thing to the mayors of each city and tell them, listen, get on your city government agency workers and force them to do their jobs. And the mayors of each city need to tell their city government agency workers, do your jobs or you do not have a job. Because it's the government workers that are screwing up people's cases. And that's why the error rates are so high. And that's why they have all these problems. Now, with all that being said, here's another thing again that the Trump administration, especially the Secretary of Agriculture, they need to comprehend this into their brains. People who are alive and who collect government benefits like SNAP benefits have to recertify periodically. And when they do their recertifications, they have to submit evidence proving their case. So for the Secretary of Agriculture to make that idiotic suggestion of shut the SNAP program down and just everybody has to reapply, that's the most pathetic, idiotic, jackass thing to stipulate. And again, the Secretary of Agriculture does not have the power and the authority to shut down the SNAP program. Congress created the SNAP program. Congress funds the SNAP program. Okay, seriously. So, like I said, if you want to fix these parts, Congress needs to get on the governors and the mayors from each state and city and force them to get on their state government agency workers and their city government agency workers and force them to do their jobs because these government workers are a bunch of screw ups. And they are the ones causing this problem. Now, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind all my fans out there about my website, Advocate Information Highway. The link to there is AIHNY.com. Again, that's AIHNY.com. You guys could check out all the pages on there. And so, with that, take care, everybody. Bye.